7. Loving family. This cat has been in the water for a long time, he said. He is very weak. Why don't you save him? Many miles down the river stood a little hut with beautiful red flowers in the windows and a blue front door. Vegetables grew in the garden, and there were apple trees and green fields around the house. Reino Nurmi lived here with his wife. They are from Finland and had a 10-year-old daughter, Helvi. Life was difficult in this wild place near the forest. But Nurmi were strong people. They worked hard and lived frugally. They ate what they grew. They fished in the river and sold wood. Unlike his parents, Helvi was born in Canada. Every day she walked through the lonely countryside to the school bus. And every afternoon when she came home, she told her parents about her life outside the small farm. One Sunday afternoon, Helvi was playing by the river. She threw a stone into the water. She was lonely and wanted a friend to play with. Suddenly a big wave came. Helvi was safe because he did not stand in the river. As she stood watching, she saw something strange. What was that? It looked like a small, wet body. It spun in the water and pressed against rocks. Helvi ran along the water's edge to get a better look. Then she called her mother. Mother. Mother, come quickly. Weird animals in the river, trapped in rocks. Woman, Nurmi was out in the garden planting vegetables. She hurried down to the riverbank and called her husband at the same time. He followed her and walked quietly with her quiet and thoughtful face. Everyone was silent, looking down at the small, thin body on top of the rock. Then Nurmi put her hand lightly on it and pulled the skin above and below one of her eyes. When I turned around, I saw Helvi's worried face nearby. This cat has been in the water for a long time, he said. He is very weak. Why don't you save him? Helvi and his mother wanted to save the poor animal. So Nurmi picked up the wet cat and went back to the cabin. He put the cat in a sunny place by the fire to dry. Helvi's mother then opened her teeth and Helvi poured warm milk into her mouth. The cat trembled, coughed, and milk came out of its mouth. Nurmi gripped her body tightly. The cat coughed again, and river water flowed out of his mouth. Then he lay down and fell asleep. Nurmi smiled happily. Keep him warm and calm, he said to Helvi. But do you really want a cat? Oh yeah, Helvi replied, looking down at the animals sleeping by the fire. Her mother went into the kitchen to make dinner. Her father went to feed the chickens. Helvi sat next to the cat and stared at it. Sometimes she put her hands near the fire and touched her soft, warm body. About 30 minutes later the cat woke up. Helvi stared into her deep blue eyes. The cat turned around and began to move slowly. Very excited, Helvi called her parents. After another half hour, she held the Siamese cat in her arms. Then she gave him milk. He usually hated milk, but he drank it right away. Then he began to wash his body from head to toe. When the Nurmi family ate dinner, he ate a bowl of meat. He then paced around the table legs, raising his tail in the air and begging for more food. Helvi thought he was great. That night, Nurmi ate fresh fish. A soup with potatoes, cooked in a country style with the head on. Helvi bowed his head, put the soup and potatoes in a bowl and placed it on the floor. The cat ate everything and held the bowl with its front paws. Finally happy, he lay down at Helvi's feet and fell asleep. For the first time in his life, Helvi had a pet of his own. Helvi carried the cat to bed. He was on her shoulders as she climbed the steep steps to her tiny room on the top floor of her house. She put him to bed in the old wooden bed she had slept in as a baby. There she fell asleep happily. She woke her up late at night when a cat climbed onto her back. The weather outside was cold, wet and windy. Helvi got up to close the window. Then she lay down and felt the warm and comfortable body of a cat on her bed. In the morning, Helvi went for a long walk and drove her car to school to find a cat lying by the window. His hair glistened in the sun as he washed sleepily. His eyes followed Mrs. Nurmi moving around the cabin. She went outside with her laundry and turned her cat around. He stood on her feet behind her and looked at her. His mouth opened and closed behind the window. She ran back and opened the door. He sat next to her and followed her around the cottage and garden all morning. He cried out when she accidentally locked him in the cabin. He followed Nurmi's all day long. Why is he always looking at us? Woman, Nurmi asked her husband. Maybe he needs to be around people. But her husband noticed the worried look in the cat's blue eyes. He didn't look up when the bird flew near him. No, it's because he can't hear you, said Nurmi. I think the poor cat is deaf. Helvi ran most of the way home across fields. When she saw the cat, she picked him up. He sat on her shoulder while she helped her mother with dinner, and she realized her father was right. The cat was deaf and did not listen to any sounds. After dinner, the parents sat by the fireplace while Helvi read to them. They were Finnish, so they couldn't read English, but Helvi was studying English at school every day, so he helped them with their new language. They sat down to rest, put the cat at their feet and listened to the gentle voice of the child. She had a book about Siamese cats. Great and proud Siamese cats around the world. As they listened, they looked down at their visitors. He lay in front of the fire, wagging his tail from time to time. His beautiful blue eyes stared at the hands of his daughter turning the pages of a book. They touched his soft body and his amazing cock. Helvi then handed him a bowl of milk, which he drank proudly like a king before she carried him upstairs to his bed. That night, and another, the cat lay happily in Helvi's arms. During the day, he followed her parents everywhere while she was at school. He approached his mother who was looking for a tree in the forest. He sat at her feet on her front steps while she prepared her vegetables in the sun. He followed Mr. Nurmi and his packhorse across the fields. And late in the afternoon, when Helvi came home from school, he waited for her. He was one of her family, but on the fourth night he changed. He didn't seem comfortable in Helvi's bed. He shook his head and cried unhappy. Finally, he lay down and rested his head on her hand. She noticed that his ears were moving. He could hear everything outside at night. She's glad he's no longer deaf. Soon she fell asleep. When she woke up later that night, her bed felt cold. She saw the cat was near the open window and she looked across the bright field into the tall dark trees below. His long tail moved from side to side. She held out her hand, but he suddenly flew out the window onto the soft ground below. She looked down and called out. His head turned to her voice for the first time. After his eyes glowed in the moonlight, he turned away from him. She sadly saw him go. He didn't need her now. Weeping, she saw him go out into the night. He went to the river. Soon the cat's walking shadow was overshadowed by other shadows.